Welcome to this demo where we're going to be taking a look through a video time lapse and looking at those three elements that we've discussed: the concept, the composition, and the technical implementation. What you're looking at right now is my own character, Reiko Ayanama. She is derived of a concept that has had inspirations and references to build out and hybridize all the conceptual themes. So we have a science fiction style character in a somewhat melancholy, demure pose. She's kind of floating, and she has hints of her genre, which is science fiction, with a plug suit and a strange looking staff and such. And of course, we have other compositional elements in there to drive home our feeling and our mood. All right. Now, this is the end of the workflow in terms of the drawing phase, not touching the coloring or the painting phase as of yet. But this is the end of the workflow where we've had our rough drawing and we have now inked the illustration as well. And of course, your style forms part of your conceptual phase as well. You know, what style are you going to be doing this particular illustration in, or a particular drawing or painting in, or what have you? All right. So this is the work I'm going to be moving you through, just like I've moved you through the classical artworks previously to this of Alphonse Mucha. We're going to look at the same things. All right. So when creating this illustration, right, thinking about concept, we define the concept, we figure out what we want. That's our ideation phase. All right. Then we need to think about composition. When it comes to character illustration, all right, and I'm going to move us to sort of more or less the start, the rough start of this image, and we'll move through the whole workflow as we go along. When it comes to this particular image, right, you may not necessarily have a pre-idea of the composition, but you want the composition to be good. So you could start with, well, I want my key main shape of my composition to be a triangle, for example, and you then find a pose, in the instance of character illustration, that will fit into that triangle, and that will be a triangle ultimately. In the instance of this piece, I found the pose that I wanted first, and then I built out the composition from the key main shape of that pose. So if we take a look at this pose here, right, we effectively have a diamond shape, all right? And we will deep dive these compositional tools and these compositional elements in Module 6 of the course, right? I will teach you these compositional tools and compositional elements. But for now, I just want you to understand how the basic theory is being used. But anyway, we have the pose, and it is roughly a diamond shape. And so, because I have that diamond shape and I have the pose that I want, and this aligns with my concept, right? I now use the technical skills to draw out the character, get the anatomy, the shapes, the proportions, the line weights, and all that jazz down, right? Drawing eyes, noses, ears, hair, mouth, clothing, and such, drawing in 3D, and all of our art fundamentals from the art fundamental sphere, while conforming my concept and my technical skills to my composition. All right. And so here I have, effectively, like I said, a diamondish shape, right? And as such, I then continue to reinforce the idea of this diamond shape into the image. Because, like I said, and I want you to remember this, ultimately, what makes an image visually appealing is its shape's composition on the page, the composition of its shapes. Now, we can expand this out to the shapes of lighting, the shapes of the repeating shapes in terms of concept, the repeating symbolism in terms of concept. Those are also compositional things. But what I'm talking about primarily here is the visual shapes of the page. If the shape arrangement is appealing, even if the technical skill is at a lower level, right? Maybe the anatomy is not that great. Maybe the line art's not that great, right? Maybe the concept's not that great, right? But the composition is really good. Ultimately, it will be appealing. And that's what we wanted to do, right? So you want to master composition and then grow in your concept, grow in your technical skill. But because you know you have a solid compositional foundation to work with, you almost can approach your work more confidently, right? Anyway, so what we've got here is our diamond shape, and as I move through the piece, I start trying to bring in elements that complement this composition. All right, and you can see here I've got a diamond shape in the staff, and she's got some kind of diamond shaped floating computer of some sort. All right, so let's erase this. Let's move a bit further on in the image. Whoops. And let's move along. And so here, what you see is I'm trying to use another compositional element here, which is to keep the focus on the focal point, and focal points in our shape. So here's our diamond shape once again. And our focal point of the image here, which would be our sort of rule of thirds focal point. Let me undo that. It's going to be something like this. And again, you'll learn this in Module 6. We have a centralized area here. So it's in these central columns here, right? Within these central columns, a centralized focal point that is above this line here. So we've divided the page into 3 sections, 1, 2, 3 this way, and 1, 2, 3 that way. And in this zone is our focal point, all right? And what I want to do is I want to keep the focus here. So I'm trying to use different elements in terms of the background shape design, okay, to here implementing a background graphic. And you can use graphics. This could be hair, this could be a cape or something like that, to try to keep the focus here, right? To keep it focused on the focal point. All right. That's another instance of the compositional tools and elements being used. Okay, and what you will find as we move on is that I end up using a cape, a single-shouldered cape, to kind of drive that there. So it doesn't have the full power of the horizontal rectangle, right? But it helps somewhat. And you can see as I explore different shapes here, maybe a square is going to work, maybe a circle is going to work, maybe a triangle is going to work. What is going to give me the right feeling, the right contrast of compositional elements to really bring the composition to a place where it feels balanced? Now, again, I want you to realize, note how much thought is going into the composition, not necessarily into, am I drawing the arms perfectly? Are the hands perfectly drawn? Is she beautiful? What are all the micro elements of the piece, right? It's all about the shapes and the composition. Something else we'll talk about again in Module 6 is leading lines. I'll move us through to the rough sketch. So this is sort of the rough planning sketch, and then this is the refined sketch, right? And we'll move through that, and that's a bunch of details. And then we get to the finishing inks, or the clean lines, if you will, right? And that's a different stage. And we'll go through these line elements as well in this course, right? So the line elements are covered, dare I say, all the secrets of doing lines to a high level are in this course, and we'll get there. Nevertheless, let's go to sort of this rough line phase here. Let's get a place where we can get a nice full view. That should be fun. All right. And I want to point out some things here. Things do change in the rough phase. You'll see the design changes, this hand changes, for example. Nevertheless, we have, when we look at our composition again, right, we have our diamond shape, and we reinforce this diamond shape to the viewer with additional diamond shapes. Okay. These little guys change position at some point. And, this shape is an active part of the scene in that it's a physical object, right? But these guys here, these are just background graphics, right? These 3 little diamond shapes. We also then have this rectangle here, which I felt created a nice contrast. It brought stability and a nice parallel shape to the asymmetry of the sort of skewed diamond shape of the character, right? And then additionally, the speech bubble itself brought a nice degree of contrast, because these 2 shapes are angles, very angular, right? And this is very round. Okay. So I thought it brought a good degree of contrast. So here you can see we have shape dynamics. But what I want to talk about as well is leading lines. All right, let's use a different color here. And again, we will cover this all, right? This is in the last module of this course, which is Module 6. We'll cover this in detail. But for this introduction, to the course. I want you to feel confident that I'm moving you in a direction that is going to have you producing great art, right? That is the goal. I want you to produce great art. Okay. So here we go again. Let's take a look at some leading lines, right? Leading lines are essentially lines / I would say directional elements that help point you to the focal point. So as I've mentioned, the focal point is the character's head, all right? What leads us there? Well, we have the staff pointing up there, right? We have the belt at an angle getting us there, all right? I wonder if I can change the thickness of this line. It doesn't seem like I can. Not a big deal. Anyway, we have the little diamond shape over here of the computer component pointing towards her, right? We have a background element in the cape that's contrasting to keep our focus here, all right? And we have these diamond shapes here, right? They're all effectively pointing to the focal point. Now, I've mentioned this before in different courses. You want to think about composition as a kingdom with one king, right? I do believe that from a philosophical level, art really follows the order of all things, and that is that there can only be one king. And so the king is the focal point over here, and everything else in the piece is working to support that focal point, right? But it works in balance, it works in tandem, it tells a story. Something else I want us to look at, which ties very heavily into our character drawing principles, right, is the line of action. So we have this diamond shape, this angular diamond shape of the overall shape, but in contrast to that shape, we have a very S-shaped composition. So line of action, should I say. So the line of action moves like that through that shape, and that nice curvature creates a great contrast to the overall diamond shape of, you know, the flat 2D diamond shape of the actual silhouette of the pose. So these are some compositional elements at play in this piece. Let's move this along a little bit. We'll take that away and get to more of the end of the piece. It's not the true final that we're seeing here. It did go through a few more adjustments. For example, I took these rocks and I made them back into background shapes. I want to just reinforce again that in this piece, you know, yes, this is a graphic element. These guys become graphic elements. This is a graphic element, almost like a comic book page, but it doesn't have to be. This could be, for example, you know, a Roman pillar. It obviously wouldn't suit the theme. This could have become a Roman pillar in a 3D object in the scene, right? Could have become something like that. These guys could have stayed rocks. This could have been, you know, I don't know, a floating computer head system or something on some kind of robotic arm to reinforce the idea. It doesn't have to be graphic elements, and it's up to you whether you want to have scenes that are just fully 3D elements or 3D elements mixed with background graphic elements, or you want to fully paint out the scene, and in the background, you know, maybe you have a mountain range that's moving along like this, and you're using that as your line to bring focus to the focal point, right? And you're using other background elements. Maybe there's, you know, I don't know, computer stairs or something here, creating a triangle shape, right? That's helping keep the viewer's focus here, and perhaps you lessen detail in this zone to guide their eye back up to the focal point. I want to reinforce to you again, composition. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to waste your time. I'm not here to give you false information. I'm really wanting you to learn to draw well in this course. So please hear me when I say composition really is the core of what makes an artwork appealing. And essentially you have a composition that's great, and then you build into that composition, you build into that your subject and your concept, and you implement your technical skills into that composition where you're drawing your subject and your object and your topic and your theme and mood. All your conceptual stuff is being implemented with your technical skills into the composition of the piece, resulting in an appealing piece. All right. And again, I will reinforce this one more time before we end this video, that you must understand that You don't need to be an absolute master of technical skill implementation. And again, technical skills, anatomy, and line weights, and coloring, and lighting, and skeletal structures, and posing. You don't need to be a master of that. Always, please, always keep learning and growing in that, right? You of course want to keep learning and growing, and that's the great fun of art, is the learning and growing always. And similarly for the concept, how can I make better concepts? How can I make this character more interesting? How can I use addition in my design by adding objects? How can I use reduction in my design to simplify the concept? You want to have your conceptual mind always working to think about how I can repeat symbolism in the image, and give the image a better story or a better mood or a better personality, or more emotion, right? That's conceptual stuff. So you've got your implementation and your technical skill and all your sort of hard art skills of practical, implementation. And then you've got your conceptual skills, story, character, design, feel, and all of that, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, we are working in imaging. Usually images are on a flat plane, they're on a page or in a scene, right? And so the composition is the foundation. And it's really, you're not going to be able to build anything without a good compositional foundation. I'll give you one more example before I go, because I like to talk a lot, right? So here's my one example for you. Imagine if I rendered to a absolute masterful level, right? I painted to a highly detailed level, all right? And my concept was really well thought out, but the composition sucked. The framing was wrong, the spacing was wrong, elements didn't balance nicely on the page. The artwork would be trash. Remember that, guys. Composition, composition, composition. I leave you with this, and I will see you in the next module. Let's skill up and let's kick some ass. I'll see you there. Cheers.